Now, the US Secretary of State John Kerry is meeting the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon in Cairo to discuss a draft ceasefire proposal. There's nothing official on what it would look like yet, this proposal, but according to Israeli officials reported in the newspaper Haaretz, so this is basically Haaretz's version of it, the ceasefire proposal is like this: a one-week temporary ceasefire starting on Sunday, during which Israel Defense Forces, IDF, would not leave the Gaza Strip entirely and would continue to locate and destroy Hamas tunnels. During the ceasefire, Israel and Hamas will begin negotiations on a more permanent arrangement with Egyptian mediation, and the Palestinian Authority would participate in those talks. The US, the UN Secretary-General and the EU would then provide guarantees to both sides that the negotiations would deal with the issues important to both sides. So for Israel, that would be disarming Gaza of its rockets and tunnels. And for Hamas, that would be ending the blockade of Gaza and repairing the damage that has been done in the Gaza Strip. And the Israeli Security Cabinet is apparently meeting very shortly to discuss that. Well, let's get some views on what's happening now. First of all, Palestinian leaders have called for a day of anger today. Our reporter John Donison is in East Jerusalem.
I am at Damascus Gate, just on the edge of Jerusalem's old city, and we've had a huge Israeli security operation here, more than 2,000 police for Friday prayers. Now, what they did was they said any Palestinian man under the age of 50 wouldn't be allowed to go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the holiest sites in Islam, and things have passed off relatively peacefully here. That isn't the case. Oh, it wasn't the case overnight. We had huge clashes at Kalandia, which is the checkpoint between Ramallah in the West Bank and Jerusalem. More than 10,000 Palestinians protesting there. 2 Palestinians were killed in clashes, more than 200 injured, as well as 29 Israeli police officers. And I think the feeling is that when dark falls here, there is the possibility of yet more violence.
That was John Donison. And let's now hear from Mark Regev, the Israeli government spokesman.
I'm afraid not. The investigation is ongoing, and sometimes these things do take time. We'll get to the bottom of it, I hope.
Right, because they don't often seem to take time when they're targets you do want to claim. I mean, I'm looking at a lot of material that's come out of your defence ministry this morning, saying we hit things last night with photographs, videos and all the rest of it. So you seem to be able to say when you hit something when you want to say you hit it.
To be fair, though, those are aircraft shots, and always when an aircraft is shooting one of its missiles, you do have a video. This is something we're talking about local fire. We're talking about a firefight in a combat zone. At this point, it's not clear that it was Israel's shell, and I would argue either way it's not Israel's responsibility because, as the Secretary-General of the United Nations has said, if the terrorists turn UN facilities into war zones, if they store their weapons there, they are responsible.
UNRWA is saying they have found 2 cases of missiles in their schools, both vacant, locked up for the summer. No missiles ever found in a school with people in them, and not in this case, they're saying.
Well, first of all, the Secretary-General himself of the United Nations has called for an investigation. So it's clear that he's not happy with what's been going on. And there are 2, as you've said, 2 documented cases where Hamas was storing weapons in UN schools, and no one is denying that. Now, in this particular case, you had a situation where the forces of Hamas, their terrorists, were shooting at our people from the UN facility, and there was a firefight. Now, I would suggest to you, and I believe this is substantiated by all the evidence, that Hamas has adopted a deliberate strategy, first of all, of using Gaza's civilians as human shields, but specifically in UN buildings. Now, we support UNRWA's humanitarian mission. We support their important work that they're doing, and there should be no question about that. But we do have questions if UNRWA is doing enough to make sure its facilities are not being exploited by terrorists. Now, it's very difficult because UNRWA doesn't have guns, and of course Hamas does. But we think more could be done. I mean, why is it that 2 UN facilities were in fact used by Hamas?
Yeah, let's just be clear about this.
UNRWA, when they're searching for these things,
when they find them, they very publicly say what they've found. These were two schools that were vacant. Obviously, it's a massive problem if these missiles are in these schools. But just to get it, accurate, what's going on here? These are vacant schools, and there has been no case that UNRWA has found of weapons in one of these places that are being used as a refuge by civilians, right?
That is correct, but yesterday we know for a fact that there was hostile fire from the vicinity of a UN school.
Ah, the vicinity. Well, now we're getting some clarity. The vicinity. So what was the fire from the school?
It's either from inside the school or directly adjacent to the school.
You don't know.
There are repeated examples. My forces were involved in combat on the ground, right? Anyone who has covered conflict, like you, any soldier who's been in conflict knows that combat is a very difficult thing. It's very, for me to tell you now exactly where they were firing from, we know they were flying from either the school or the immediate vicinity using the school as a shield.
The fog of war is an argument, but I have to say the videos that the IDF are putting out...
It's not an argument, it's the truth, sir.
Well, the videos that the IDF are putting out from whatever you've got up there, drones presumably filming these things, are extremely high resolution. They are put up within hours of incidents taking place that you want to talk about. It does seem odd that in the cases where there have been civilian casualties causing international upset, that in those cases investigations are announced that, I don't know how long this one will take, but it seems to take quite a long time, whereas in other cases you've got the information you need within hours.
I would suggest that it's important to do an important investigation. I'd remind you, we did take responsibility for a very sad case on the beach where 4 Palestinians, we said it was our mistake. The target was misidentified and we accidentally killed four young people on the beach. So we do admit when we make mistakes. I reject what you're saying, that somehow we cover these things up. But let's be clear here, and I'd like to get back to the topic is, why is Hamas turning UN facilities into war zones? Why are they deliberately
that's your topic.
UN
the other Hamas's topic is
did
you hit civilians? That's the topic other people are talking about.
No. First of all, the UN Secretary General himself said in the same statement where he called for an investigation, yes, for an independent investigation of what's going on with the UNRWA facilities, he said that by turning UN facilities into arsenals and places where the terrorists are conducting their activities, those people who are doing so are in fact endangering the civilians there. And he was very clear.
How long will your investigation take, and who's going to do it?
As long as it takes to get to the truth.
Who will do it?
We do it ourselves. The IDF has a very serious
so the IDF
self-examination process. I just gave you an example of how it works, if you don't mind me saying.
That's the Israeli government spokesman Mark Regev there. In the last edition of NewsHour, I pressed Mr. Regev about a statement he'd made that the UN said Hamas weapons had landed in Beit Hanun yesterday, putting to him that the UN had denied saying that, and he promised to get back to us. And he has, showing us a tweet from a UN official which says, also being reported that there were Hamas records falling in Beit Hanun today. So we're happy to read that out. The distinction seems to be between did the UN say that or did the UN quote media reports saying that. Now, the other part of the Palestinian territories is geographically separated from Gaza by Israeli territory. It's under the control of Fatah and has been comparatively quiet. Dr. Sabri Saidam is Deputy Secretary General of the Fatah Revolutionary Council. I asked him whether he agrees with the Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat, who was on the American media this morning, saying that he thinks the West Bank could explode.
Obviously, people are watching what's happening in Gaza. There's been 10,000 tons of bombs that have been dropped over the last few days, a massive number of casualties and a huge number of those martyred. So Gaza is a disaster. It's unethically acceptable to see Palestinians die this way. And obviously, the people of the West Bank, they will jump the support of their fellow brothers and sisters.
And yet, there is great disunity between Fatah and Hamas, is there not?
That was the story of the past. If you asked me this question 2 days ago, I would have said maybe that was the case. But we speak, things are different. We are united. We're facing this conflict, and we realize that the source of this issue is not really the attacks nor the missiles that are being launched out of Gaza, but if anything, it's the prolonging and the prevalence of the Israeli occupation. That's the longest occupation in modern times.
OK, but you say that there's now unity between Hamas and Fatah. What sort of institutional form will that take?
Well, the main institutional form is the existence of the unity government that's operational now in Gaza, even under these atrocious circumstances, and they're operational in the West Bank. And government is functional. Yes, it doesn't make it to the news due to the news coming out of the war scene, but they're functional and they're building in support for Gaza, whether by aid or by measures on the ground to support those who have been displaced and those who are in desperate need for support.
Do you agree that Hamas should not be firing rockets which are aimed so generally that they're basically aimed at civilians in Israel?
Well, I agree on many things that the international community has been for the last few days in justifying the war that Israel has waged against the Palestinians, have been dealing with the side effects and not the illness itself. And the main illness is the existence of the Israeli occupation. Had there not been an occupation, Palestinians would not have lived the misery we're witnessing now. And I heard your interview with Mark Regev, and I commend you on the questions he asked him.
Yeah, well, I'm asking you a question. Do you condemn Hamas for firing rockets at civilians?
There should be an end to occupation. Palestinians are resisting this occupation, and any civilians being targeted, whether Jews or Muslims, Christians or what have you, is totally unacceptable and should not be any violence in the region. But to uproot violence in the region, if you allow me, has to be an end to occupation. There is no justification to security and occupation being sustained together. Israel has to understand that the only way forward for it to win the support of the people in the international community and the people of Palestine is to end occupation, abide by
You've got lots of advice for Israel, but you've got lots of advice for Israel, and you've repeated it 3 or 4 times. But the point that Israel is making is that Hamas is firing at civilians, and you seem unwilling to even address that point.
No, I very much addressed that point. I said to you that any violence targeting civilians is totally unacceptable.
And that was Dr. Sabri Saidam there. You're listening to the World Service of the BBC.